Story 1. The Executive Who Dreamed of 9/11 and Did Not Go to Work. It began in the quiet hours before dawn, a silence so thick it felt unnatural. One of those nights where the air seems to hold its breath, as if the world itself knows something is coming, but says nothing. He was lying in bed beside his wife, warm under the covers. Nothing strange, nothing dangerous. And then the dream began. He didn't drift into it. He was dropped into it. One moment he was in his bed. The next he was standing in a hallway he knew too well, the upper floors of the North Tower. But something was wrong. Smoke choked the air. People screamed, though their faces were only shadows. Flashes of orange lit the walls like frantic warnings. The floor shook beneath him. A sound like metal being torn apart filled the air, a violent, roaring thunder. Then the fire came. It raced down the corridor like a living beast, devouring cubicles and swallowing light. He ran, but every step felt heavy, as if time itself were trying to drag him down. He called out coworkers' names, people he saw every morning, but no one answered. He turned a corner and saw a jagged hole torn in the building's side. Wind roared past him, New York City twisted far below. Then came the impact, the sound that would haunt him forever, a detonation of fire and steel. The building lurched, screaming like something alive and dying. And he fell, falling endlessly, until he hit the floor of his own bedroom. Awake, gasping, covered in sweat. His wife shot upright, frightened by his scream. He could barely speak. The flames, the falling, the screams, all still burning behind his eyes. When he finally found his voice, he whispered the words that would change his life. "I'm not going to work tomorrow." His wife was stunned. He never missed work. He worked high in the North Tower, and duty was in his blood. But tonight, his voice carried something she had never heard. Not fear, but a warning. He told her everything. And though she didn't believe in premonitions, she believed him, and that was enough. He didn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, the nightmare returned. The fire, the explosion, the collapse. He stayed awake until dawn, waiting, trembling, listening to a fear that felt less like imagination and more like destiny. That morning, he stayed home, and at 8:46 a.m., the sky above Manhattan exploded. The windows shook. The sound was wrong, a violent roar that didn't belong to this world. He turned on the TV, and there it was, the North Tower, his tower, burning. The fire was on his exact floor, the place where he should have been sitting. He fell to his knees because the dream was not a dream. It was a warning.
He stared at the television, unable to move, unable to breathe. His wife covered her mouth, trembling, because the flames pouring out of the building, the chaos, the screams, the smoke were exactly what he had seen. Every detail. Minutes later, another roar split the sky. The south tower was hit. He flinched as if the blast had struck him, like he was back inside the nightmare, running through smoke and fire. He tried calling coworkers. No one answered. Not one. Then, on live television, before the eyes of the world, the South Tower began to collapse. The top leaned, the steel bent, the building folded into itself like a dying giant. He recognized the motion because he had felt it in the dream. But the nightmare wasn't finished. 30 minutes later, the North Tower, his tower, began to fall. He felt it before he saw it, a pressure in his chest, a tremor deep in his bones. Then the collapse, a storm of concrete, a cloud of ash, a descent that erased thousands of lives in a single shattering moment. He realized he was watching the version of himself that didn't survive. The version who went to work, sat at his desk, ignored the dream. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even cry. Survival didn't feel like relief. It felt like guilt. He whispered, "I should have been there." His wife held him as he shook. The phone rang for hours, family checking if he was alive, but he didn't answer. How could he explain that a dream had saved him? Even psychologists who spoke with him later admitted it didn't fit any known explanation. It was documented, filed, studied, but never understood. In the days that followed, he kept asking the same question. Why me? Why did he feel the fire before it came? Why did he hear screams that hadn't yet happened? Why did he dream the collapse with such horrifying accuracy? No one knows. But one truth remains. He survived one of the darkest days in American history because something impossible, warned him in the night.
Story 2. The Ignored Prophecy of the Challenger Space Shuttle Disaster, 1986. She had never felt fear like that before. Not the ordinary kind. Not the kind that comes and goes like a passing storm, but something heavier, something ancient, something that sat deep inside the chest and refused to let go. For days, Krista McAuliffe, the teacher chosen to make history, the first civilian to go to space, woke up with a weight pressing down on her lungs. A pressure, a warning, a whisper she couldn't explain. At first, she tried to ignore it. After all, she had been selected from thousands. People celebrated her. She was supposed to be excited, honored even. But the dreams began. Slowly, quietly, like smoke creeping under a closed door. In the first dream, she saw the sky, blue, endless, peaceful. Then the blue cracked, splitting like glass hit by a stone. She saw fire, not flames from a campfire, not the warm glow of a candle, but violent fire, white, bright, explosive, a fire that didn't belong on Earth. She heard screaming, dozens of voices blending together, echoing across the sky. She woke drenched in sweat, heart punching the inside of her chest, lungs desperate for air. She tried to calm herself. It was only a dream, only a dream. But then came the second one. This time she saw pieces falling, metal fragments, burning debris raining from the sky like dying stars. She heard names. She didn't know whose, but she felt loss, deep, familiar loss, as if the people calling out were already gone. She woke with tears running down her face. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But the dreams didn't stop. They grew louder, clearer, more violent. And then one night, just days before the launch, she had the dream that broke her. She was standing on the launch pad, alone, the Challenger rising behind her, towering like a silent giant. The engines ignited. The ground shook. The air vibrated. Then fire erupted upward. A flash, a roar, a sound like the sky being torn apart. The shuttle didn't climb. It shattered. She watched herself die. She woke screaming. Her husband rushed to her side, but she couldn't stop trembling. Her hands wouldn't unclench. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak. And when she finally could, the words came out small, broken, barely a whisper. "I don't want the launch to happen." She meant it. Every syllable shook with certainty. Her family listened, shocked, confused, worried. And she did something she had never done before. She wrote it down, in her diary. "Something is going to go wrong. I feel it. I don't want the launch to happen." Her handwriting trembled across the page, thin, uneven, as if even the pen could feel the fear bleeding through her. The next morning she showed the entry to her sister. "I've never felt anything like this," Krista whispered. "It feels like a warning, like something terrible is coming." Her sister hugged her, told her she was just stressed, tired, overwhelmed. But Krista knew, deep inside, in the place where instinct lives, where intuition whispers truth before the mind catches up, she knew. Still, she boarded the plane. Still, she arrived at the Kennedy Space Center. Still, she attended the final preparations. But the entire time, she felt watched. Not by people, not by cameras, but by the future. By the moment her dreams kept returning to. By the moment she feared she could not escape. Even the engineers noticed something was off. She was usually bright, smiling, curious, the teacher who won the hearts of everyone around her. But that week, she was quiet, withdrawn, her eyes distant, as if she were seeing something no one else could. One technician later said he had never seen someone look so afraid while pretending to be calm. She tried to breathe, to steady herself, to be what everyone expected her to be. But the fear remained like a hand gripping the back of her neck.
Then came the morning of January 28th, 1986. Cold, unusually cold, the kind of cold that felt wrong for a Florida launch. The icicles on the shuttle structure made her heart twist. Her breath fogged the air as she walked, and for a moment she felt the dream wrap around her again. The shaking ground, the white fire, the falling sky. A colleague approached her. "You okay?" She forced a smile, tried to sound confident, but the words came out hollow. "I just have a strange feeling today." He laughed gently. "Tension. Everyone gets it." But she knew. She knew. And yet, she stepped into the shuttle. She fastened her harness. She stared at the small window beside her as the engines prepared to roar to life. And something inside her whispered, "This is the moment. The dream. It's happening." Her hands trembled, not from excitement, not from cold, from knowing. And then the countdown. 10, 9, 8. She closed her eyes. 7, 6. She saw flames in her mind. 5, 4. She gripped the seat. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. The shuttle lifted. Her heart pounded. And then, 73 seconds later, the sky shattered, just as she dreamed. Her diary would later be analyzed by American psychologists studying premonitions. They found the entries, her warnings, her exact dreams. They called it one of the most remarkable cases of intuitive fear ever documented. Some called it instinct, others called it coincidence. But those who read her diary, those who listened to her family, those who heard the trembling in her voice before she boarded the shuttle, they believed it was something else. A warning from a place we still don't understand. A whisper from fate that she heard but could not escape. Her family said later that in the days before the launch, she seemed divided between two worlds. One world was the bright, hopeful dream she had carried all her life, the dream of teaching millions of children what it meant to reach for the stars, the dream of reminding an entire nation that learning could be daring, bold, ambitious. The other world is the one she saw when she closed her eyes. Fire, metal, silence, death. Two futures, one glowing, one burning, pulling at her as if the universe itself hadn't made up its mind yet. She stood between them like a single candle in a dark room, flickering, uncertain, fragile. And yet she walked forward. Perhaps she believed the dream was only fear. Perhaps she hoped reality would bend away from the vision that haunted her. Perhaps she simply felt responsible for the students watching, for the cameras, for the country that had placed its faith on her shoulders. But deep inside, the warning never stopped whispering. Even the night before the launch, she lay awake in her bunk at the astronaut quarters, listening to the hum of the ventilation system, staring at the ceiling as shadows moved across it like restless spirits. Her heart wouldn't slow down. Her breath wouldn't settle. She felt it again, that pressure in the air, that heavy, invisible presence, that silent message she couldn't decipher, but could not ignore. She turned on her side, hugged the pillow, and prayed. Not for success, not for glory, but for peace, for clarity, for safety, for something, anything, to stop what she felt coming. She did not sleep. When dawn broke, that cold, unforgiving dawn, she moved slowly, as if her body had grown heavier overnight. Her hands trembled slightly as she put on her flight suit. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the bright blue uniform, the Challenger mission patch, her own face pale, eyes tired, lips pressed into a thin line. She whispered to her reflection, "Maybe it was just fear, just nerves." Her reflection didn't answer. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been. Frost clung to the launch tower. Bitter wind brushed against her neck as she stepped toward the shuttle transport vehicle. Journalists saw her smile, but none saw how forced it was. None saw the tightening in her jaw or the faint, strained look in her eyes. Only her crewmates sensed something. One later said, "She seemed quiet, almost haunted." Another said that when the crew waved to the cameras, Krista's hand lifted slower than the others, as if weighed down by something only she could feel.
When she climbed aboard the shuttle, the world outside felt strangely distant, muted, as if wrapped in cotton. Even the roar of the engines warming up felt far away, as if coming from another reality. She sat in her seat, buckled in, and felt the straps tighten around her, a reminder she could no longer turn back. The interior of the shuttle felt claustrophobic. The metal walls seemed to pulse. The control panels glowed faintly. Her breath fogged the inside of her helmet. She closed her eyes, and the dreams returned. The sky splitting, the white explosion, the falling fragments. It came so sharply that she flinched and gripped the edge of her seat. A voice over the comms crackled. "Challenger, you are go for launch." The crew cheered quietly. Some laughed nervously. Others exhaled in relief. Krista swallowed hard. Her mouth felt dry. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She whispered, so softly no one else could hear, "Please, not like the dream." Then the countdown began. When the engines ignited, the entire shuttle trembled, a deep vibration running through the metal frame, through her bones, through her breath. As the shuttle rose, the world below shrank, the ground falling away like a memory fading. But the fear didn't fade, it grew. It wrapped itself around her chest like invisible hands, tightening, tightening, tightening. She stared out the small window. The sky was so blue, too blue, the same blue from the dream. Her heart dropped. And then, 73 seconds later, everything she had seen came true. A bright white flash, a violent roar, a bloom of fire against the perfect sky. The Challenger broke apart, just like in her dream, just like in her diary. Her family watched helplessly. Her students screamed. Millions stared in disbelief as the sky filled with twisting trails of smoke. A silence fell across America, a silence so heavy it felt like grief itself had descended. In the weeks that followed, NASA recovered her personal diary, pages filled with excitement, hope, fear, and on the final entries, the warnings, the dreams, the dread she couldn't name. The lines written with shaking hands. "Something is going to go wrong. I feel it." Psychologists who studied the diary later said she displayed signs of anticipatory fear, something beyond normal anxiety, a sense of danger without explanation. Some dismissed it, others debated it. But those close to her, those who heard the tremor in her voice, saw the fear in her eyes, and read the final pages of her journal, they believed she had felt something coming from far beyond reason, a premonition, a warning the world wasn't ready to understand. Her story became one of the most haunting examples of intuitive fear ever recorded in American history. A whisper that echoed through time long after she was gone. A reminder that sometimes the mind sees things the future hides, and sometimes we are powerless to escape what we already know. In the days following the explosion, the sky over Cape Canaveral felt strangely empty, as if something sacred had been torn away, leaving only silence drifting above the ocean. Krista's family could barely speak. Her husband moved through their home as if underwater, each step
slow, heavy, hollow. Her children, too young to understand the full meaning of national tragedy, only knew that their mother was gone, and that something unspeakably large had swallowed her from the sky. Her daughter asked, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Did the dream take her?" No one had an answer. The media tried to capture the moment, the grief of a nation, the shock of millions, the fiery wound carved into the blue morning sky. But what they could never show, what they would never truly understand, was the quiet devastation inside the McAuliffe home. Her diary became the silent witness. Psychologists traced her handwriting like investigators at a crime scene, studying each curve, each tremble, each frantic line. They noted moments of pure excitement, hope bursting from the pages as she described lessons she wanted to teach from space, letters from students, the overwhelming dream of representing every classroom in America. Then the shift. The dreams, the dread, the warnings written not in fear of failing, but in fear of dying. One analyst later wrote, "She sensed catastrophe with a clarity that defies the boundaries of ordinary intuition." But no study, no academic paper, no televised interview could capture the truth of her final days, because people close to her saw things no report could measure. They remembered how she hesitated before signing autographs for students, as if wondering if these signatures would be her last. They remembered how she stared a little too long at the horizon the night before the launch, as if memorizing the sky she feared would take her. They remembered the hollow look that crossed her eyes when she said she just had a bad feeling, a look that didn't belong to excitement or nerves or fatigue, but to someone standing on the thin line between destiny and doom. Her closest friend would later confess that Krista called her from the training center 2 nights before liftoff. "I keep having dreams," she said, voice trembling, "dreams that end in fire." Her friend told her to rest, but Krista didn't sleep that night. She walked the hallways alone, barefoot, the cold floor grounding her as she tried to make sense of the weight inside her chest. She paused at a window overlooking the launch pad and watched the shuttle glow under the floodlights. So beautiful, so powerful, so silent. In that stillness, she felt something, a pull, a whisper, a warning so subtle it almost blended with the hum of the night. Later, investigators would call the launch a mechanical failure. Engineers would blame the O-rings, officials would blame the cold. But her diary told a different story, a story of instinct, a story of premonition, a story of a woman who felt danger long before metal began to fail. When the Challenger broke apart, the world saw the smoke, the light, the impossible image of fire blooming against the morning sky. What the world didn't see was the wave of guilt that crushed the hearts of those who dismissed her fear, her sister, her colleagues, her friends. They replayed every moment she whispered, "I'm scared. I have a bad feeling. I don't want the launch to happen." They carried that weight for years. Some still carry it. The teacher who once believed she would inspire millions from orbit instead became a symbol of something far more haunting. The intuition we ignore, the warning we dismiss, the quiet voice that speaks before fate unfolds. In the years after her death, Her diary was stored carefully, handled only with gloves, studied only by experts, treated like the fragile artifact it was. But for those who read it, one passage stood out, a line written 3 days before the launch, almost hesitant, as if she struggled to put fear into words. I hope I'm wrong, but something feels wrong. Those 7 words would echo across decades. Teachers read them. Astronauts read them. Students studying dreams and intuition read them. And many wondered the same thing. Did she know? Not in a logical sense, not in a mechanical sense, but in the quiet, primal way that humans have sensed danger long before science existed to explain it. The mind sees things we don't consciously recognize.
It gathers patterns. It hears the subtle shifts. It feels the tremors before the earthquake reaches the surface. And sometimes, a dream is not a dream. It is a message from the part of us that listens to the world more deeply than we realize. In the end, Christa McAuliffe became more than a symbol of tragedy. She became a reminder that intuition is real, that fear is sometimes a signal, that the subconscious knows what the conscious mind refuses to see. A reminder that the universe sometimes whispers warnings, softly, quietly, and we must learn to listen. Today, her story still haunts those who hear it. A teacher with a dream, a diary with a warning, a sky that broke too soon, a nation left staring upward, searching the clouds for answers that may never come. And somewhere, in that space between knowledge and mystery, her voice still echoes. Something is going to go wrong. I feel it. A whisper that time has not been able to silence. Story 3. The Man Who Dreamed the Bridge Would Fall. He never considered himself a man of visions. He wasn't spiritual, not superstitious, not the kind of person who believed in omens, signs, or anything beyond the world he could see with his own 2 eyes. He was a truck driver, a father, a man who lived a simple life in Minneapolis, waking before dawn, making coffee in the quiet kitchen, watching the morning news as he tied his boots. His routine was a ritual, predictable, comforting, until the dreams began. The first one came softly, not a nightmare, not violent, just wrong. He dreamed he was driving along the I-35W bridge, the same bridge he crossed almost every day of his adult life. The traffic was slow, normal. The river below looked calm, ripples moving lazily across the water. Then, a sound, a low, metallic groan, like the earth itself was exhaling in pain. He looked up. The road in front of him cracked, a single line at first, thin like a pencil mark. Then it widened, split, tore open. Cars lurched forward, horns blared, metal screamed. The bridge tilted, snapped, and collapsed into the river below. He woke drenched in sweat, breathing like he had run miles. He told himself it was stress, just stress, a dream born from exhaustion. He didn't mention it to his wife, didn't tell anyone. But the dream came again, and again, night after night, each time clearer, each time louder, each time closer, as if whatever force created it wanted him to understand every detail of what was coming. He began waking at 3 a.m. every night, the same moment the bridge fell in the dream. He would sit at the edge of his bed, head in his hands, feeling a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. He tried to ignore it, tried to push it away, but the fear crept into his waking life. He started avoiding the bridge, taking longer routes to work, lying to himself that he just wanted a change. His wife noticed. "You're leaving earlier these days. You okay?" He nodded. He wasn't. For the first time in his life, a structure he had trusted, a structure built by engineers, reinforced by steel, felt like a living thing, waiting to die. Some mornings he parked near the riverbank. He would look at the bridge from below, watching cars move across it in neat, careless lines. Nothing looked wrong. No cracks, no strain, no sign that the earth above him was holding its breath. But still, the dreams came. One night, the dream changed. This time he wasn't in a vehicle. He was standing on the riverbank, watching the bridge from a distance. The sun was setting. Orange light painted the water. Then, that terrible sound again, that deep, metallic roar. The bridge sagged, tilted, and collapsed in on itself. Some cars fell instantly. Others clung to the edge for seconds that felt like years before sliding into the water. The screams echoed across the river long after the dust had settled, and he watched all of it, frozen, helpless, unable to move, as if the dream itself held him in place. When he woke, he knew something was different. This wasn't just fear. This wasn't anxiety. This was a warning. And this time, he felt certain, down to the marrow of his bones, that the bridge's days were numbered. He stopped using it entirely, changed routes permanently, told his boss he preferred the scenic way. But inside, he felt a cold truth growing. The bridge is going to fall. I don't know when, but it will. Then came the day everything changed. August 1st, 2007. He left work early. The afternoon was thick and humid, the kind of heat that clings to the skin and makes the sky feel heavy. Strangely heavy. As he drove home, a familiar unease crept into his stomach. That same tightness, that same whisper, that same dread. Instead of turning toward his house, he drove to the river. He parked in the same spot from his dream days earlier. The sky looked wrong, too quiet, too still. And then, as he stood there, looking up at the bridge, he heard it. The sound from his dreams, that long, metallic roar that didn't belong to the living world. It vibrated through the air, a deep rumble that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. His mouth went dry. His heart dropped. He whispered, "Not today. Please, not today." And then it happened. The roadway buckled. A section of the bridge sagged downward. Cars skidded. The entire structure twisted in slow, impossible motion, like a beast collapsing under its own weight. Then a deafening roar. Steel snapping, concrete splitting, screams rising from both the bridge and the riverbanks. The I-35W bridge fell into the Mississippi River in a cascade of dust, metal, and chaos. Just as he had seen. Just as he had dreamed. For weeks. He watched people plunge into the water. He saw vehicles crushed beneath twisted beams. He heard screams echoing across the river, the same echoes that had chased him from sleep. 13 people died. Dozens were injured. Hundreds of families were changed forever. And he stood on the shore, exactly where he had stood in his nightmare, frozen, helpless, shaking violently as the truth swallowed him whole. The press would later call his experience an eerie coincidence. Some psychologists called it precognitive intuition. Others used the phrase catastrophic anticipation. But he knew the truth. He had seen it coming, and nothing in the world could silence the question that haunted him for the rest of his life. Why me? Why was I shown something I couldn't stop? That question would follow him forever.
He stood on the riverbank, as if the world had become a stage set that had suddenly collapsed into itself. The cold air felt sharper now, cutting like glass against his skin. The sounds around him were raw, sirens, shouts, the splintering scream of metal still ringing in the humid air. People ran, people cried, people waded into the river, arms outstretched, trying to grab lives that were disappearing beneath twisted beams and boiling water. He wanted to help. He wanted to run into the chaos and turn back time, but his legs would not obey. They trembled like thin branches in a storm. His mouth was dry. His breaths came short and shallow, as if the air itself had been stolen from him. A rescue boat surged past, cutting through debris-strewn water. Volunteers clambered onto collapsed girders, stretching ladders to reach survivors clinging to jagged metal like frightened birds. The scene played on a loop across televisions for days. A bridge folding in slow motion, cars tumbling, people pulled from the river, dust choking faces. And in the middle of that footage, in the corner of the frame, stood the man who had dreamed it. Reporters found him quickly. Cameras pointed, microphones thrust forward, questions sharp and immediate. "How did you know?" they asked. "Did you try to warn anyone? Why didn't you call the authorities?" He answered haltingly at first. He told them about the dreams, the repeated visions, the groan of metal, the tilt, the fall. He told them how he'd avoided the bridge, how he'd felt compelled to stay away. People listened with a mix of fascination and skepticism. Some whispered, "Prophet." Others muttered, "Coincidence." Still others looked away, uncomfortable with the idea that the future might sometimes arrive as a whisper in the night. In the months that followed, his story circulated through newspapers and morning programs. Psychologists were called to comment. Experts debated on radio shows and op-ed pages. Was this a rare case of precognition? Was it a brain creating patterns from anxiety? Was it simply the mind's cruel way of preparing him for something he could not name? The investigations into the collapse dug into steel, bolts, and maintenance records, the cold particulars of engineering, gusset plates, load calculations, traffic strain, and the weight of a city moved across a single span. Engineers spoke of wear, of design limits, of decades of use compressed into a moment of catastrophic failure. Those reports were meticulous and necessary. They told how 13 people died and how hundreds were forever altered. But they did not explain the dreams.
They could not map a mapless intuition onto blueprints. For him, the days after the collapse were a study in guilt and relief braided together. He told friends he felt like a reluctant witness to fate, not its author, not its savior, but a man who had been shown a scene and given no tool to change it. He had not known how to translate a dream into a warning that would be heard. Whom did you call? Which city office accepts nightmares as a municipal hazard? Who listens when a stranger says, "Listen, the bridge will fall"? Sleep did not come easy. When it did, the bridge returned, always as precise as memory. The groan, the sag, the way the water swallowed light. He would wake with his heart pounding, fingers numb as if clinging to a steering wheel. Some nights the dreams shifted, replaying fragments with new angles, new echoes, as if his subconscious was trying to show him more, to explain itself in images he could not translate into speech. He began to keep a notebook. At first the entries were sparse. Times, a few jotted impressions, the words "bridge fell" scrawled over and over. But as people reached out, as callers asked for interviews, as local clergy offered prayers, the notebook grew. He wrote the dates of the dreams, the little details, the way sunlight hit the railing, the smell of hot metal in the air, the odd tremor in a specific seam. His handwriting tilted on the page the way the bridge had tilted in his sleep. Some neighbors treated him with a kind of reverent distance. They would cross the street to step around him, as if his presence might disturb fate itself. Others avoided the subject, unwilling to wade into the uncanny. A few engage him directly: engineers, curious reporters, and one clinical psychologist who wanted to understand the mechanics of his visions. The psychologist asked gentle questions. Were the dreams accompanied by physical symptoms? How long had this been happening? Was there a family history of vivid dreams? Had he experienced trauma? His answers were honest and unembellished. He didn't claim mystic powers. He claimed exhaustion, a repetitive image, an insistence that would not be dismissed. The psychologist wrote a report and included it in a small local journal about anomalous experiences. The tone was clinical but not dismissive. A man reported recurrent, detailed imagery predicting a disaster later confirmed in reality. Readers debated nuance. Some wrote letters accusing the author of inflating coincidence into meaning. Others mailed their condolences and their curiosity. Meanwhile, the rescue and recovery continued along the Mississippi. Every morning, people returned to the riverside to lay flowers and to try to make sense of the sudden absence of a road they had taken for granted. Memorials formed. Names were read. Families hugged and sobbed into the exact same shirt collars they had worn while waiting for information. When the news recounted the victims' lives, a teacher, a father, a nurse, it seemed to him like the faces of people he had watched in the dream, nameless but devastatingly real. Months later, community meetings convened. Engineers, city officials, bereaved families. They needed answers. They needed assurance that infrastructure was not an invisible death trap. The bridge in the community's mind became both an engineering problem and a moral wound. How had such an essential structure failed, and how had lives been taken from their routines and their plans in a single, irrevocable minute? He went to one of the public meetings, not to speak, but to listen. Rows of chairs faced a podium where men with clipboards spoke in careful tones. They described inspections, maintenance schedules, the pressures of funding and time. They offered apologies measured in bureaucratic language, apologies that attempted to stitch a human angle back onto the steel that had betrayed the city. His hands were folded tight in his lap. He felt small in that governmental room, like a man reduced to a thin thread in a massive tapestry he could not pull apart.
People asked him later why he attended. He said he went because he could not stand the idea of being the only one who had seen it and not been present when others sought explanations. Over time, the media stopped chasing him as voraciously as they had on the first day. New headlines chased new disasters and new controversies. But locally, his story remained. In diners and barber shops, in whispered conversations at the end of church services, people would recall the man who had dreamed the bridge and had walked away. Some praised him, some blamed him. A few called him haunted, as if the dream were a contagious thing that might infect a town if people talked about it too much. He learned quickly that when you stand at the edge between the seen and the unseen, kindness and cruelty can sit unnervingly close. He also found solace in small, ordinary things. The hum of his truck engine when he started his route in the morning. The smell of coffee in a paper cup at a roadside stop. The sound of his children's laughter in the kitchen. Those small certainties, after the terror of collapse, became anchors he clutched like talismans. Friends helped by checking in and by asking him to speak to community groups about preparedness. If you feel something, tell someone, they would say. Better to be wrong than silent. He cooperated with that advice on principle, but he always stopped short of suggesting his dreams were a reliable method of forecasting. He urged caution, call authorities, report anomalies, but don't expect the intangible to resolve the concrete. Years later, scholars examining anecdotal precognition referenced his case, among others. A man who reported recurrent dreams that corresponded to a later disaster. They used it as a data point, a curiosity, sometimes a cautionary tale about how humans pattern the world. When they were charitable, they talked about the opaque ways the human mind detects danger long before conscious awareness. When they were skeptical, they emphasized statistical probability and the mind's propensity for retrospective matching, finding meaning after the fact. What stayed with him wasn't the label experts placed upon his experience. It was the faces. He remembered the woman clinging to a railing, the young father dragged under a beam, the child lifted from the river by a volunteer with trembling hands. He carried those images as if they were weights he shouldered, a private ledger of what he had seen and where he had found himself helpless. Sometimes, in the dead hours of the night, he would whisper apologies to the river, to the ghosts of the bridge, to the people whose names had been read out at memorials. He offered no answers. He offered only the small mercy of witness. I saw it, he would tell the dark water. I told myself to leave. I left. I am sorry. On quieter days, he would go back to the same riverbank and watch the water move. It was a way to feel the passage of time, to remind himself that the world continued, that people rebuilt, that bridges could be repaired and redesigned and sometimes replaced with something stronger, better studied, more carefully watched. Communities did rebuild. Engineers redesigned. New standards were debated in committees and written into policy. The grief remained. The lessons translated slowly into structure. In the end, the question that had haunted him since the first night remained unanswered. Why had he been shown? Why had images plucked from the future landed on his mind like seeds, only to grow in silence? Was he chosen by chance? By pattern? By some uncanny sensitivity he could neither explain nor want? He never adopted a grand explanation. He never sought out cults or gurus promising to teach him how to control the visions. If anything, the experience made him quieter, humbler. It taught him about limits, limits of speech, limits of action, limits of human foresight. It taught him that sometimes seeing is not saving. Sometimes knowledge arrives too late for use. Still, the bridge's collapse changed him. It colored his dreams for years. It made him wary, tender, and acutely aware of the thin threads that tether ordinary life to catastrophe. And in lonely moments, he would remember the first image, the first metallic groan, and wonder whether the dream was a warning meant to be acted upon, or a warning meant only to be carried, a private burden, a private witness to the fragility of things we rely upon without thought. Either way, he kept the notebook. He kept the record. He kept the memory, as if maintaining the archive of a voice that had once spoken loud enough to be heard, and yet faint enough to be ignored. His life moved forward in small increments, shifts driving a truck, family dinners, winters that blurred into summers. But beneath the routine, that quiet question pulsed. Why me? No expert has offered a definitive answer. No theory has provided final solace. Only the image remains. The bridge in the dream. The bridge in the world. And a man on the shore who saw both and bore the aftermath in his bones.
He never forgot the sound. Not the sound from the real collapse, but the sound from the dream. That deep, twisting groan, like the earth itself opening its jaw, like the bones of the world cracking under invisible pressure. It followed him, in grocery store lines, in traffic, in moments of stillness, in moments when he thought he had finally outrun it. Sometimes he heard it at night as he walked down the hall to turn off a forgotten light, a faint memory echo, so soft he wasn't sure if it came from the house or from the deepest part of his mind. His wife noticed. She noticed the way he paused at windows, as if checking whether the world still held together. She noticed how carefully he drove now, avoiding not just the site of the collapse, but every bridge in the city, every overpass, every elevated road that might conceal another disaster waiting to unfold. One evening, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. The house was quiet, too quiet. "Is it happening again?" she whispered. He nodded, barely. "Not the dream," he said, "but the feeling." She sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his back, as if grounding him to the present. "What does it feel like?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "Like something leaning," he said. "Like something heavy, shifting." The answer frightened her, though she didn't say so. Not because she believed he could see the future, but because she believed he could feel something that no one else could name. Weeks passed. Autumn crept into the city. The river thickened with fallen leaves that swirled between remnants of twisted steel, still half submerged beneath the surface. Construction crews arrived. Engineers mapped out new foundations. Drones scanned angles. The city, hungry to heal, began stitching a replacement bridge into the landscape. But healing is never simple. It does not obey schedules. It does not follow blueprints. As new beams were hoisted into place, the man stood again on the riverbank, watching the skeleton of the new structure rise. People mistook his presence for curiosity. Some thought he was looking for closure. Others assumed he wanted to see progress. But the truth was quieter. He had come because he felt that part of him was still trapped beneath the old bridge, caught in the moment where dream and disaster collided. He stood there at dusk, hands deep in his pockets, the wind smelling faintly of cold river water. A construction worker approached him, a tall man with weathered skin and a hard hat tucked under his arm. "You that guy?" he asked gently. "The one who dreamed it?" He didn't answer immediately. "I am," he finally said. The worker nodded, his eyes softening. "I saw the footage, heard people talk. I don't know what I believe about all that, but I'll tell you this." He paused, looking out at the new beams. "This bridge is going to be built right. Better, safer, stronger. It won't end like the last one." The man nodded, but he didn't smile, because this wasn't about the bridge anymore. Not entirely. It was about the knowing, the helpless, impossible knowing. "Do you still dream?" the worker asked quietly. He hesitated. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not the collapse, not anymore. But pieces." "Pieces of what?" He looked at the river, the sky, the unfinished structure rising above it. "I don't know," he said, "and that scares me more." After the worker left, he remained on the riverbank until the sky dissolved into night. The city lights flickered across the water like reflections of a broken constellation. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he listened, not for the dream, not for the groan, but for the silence in between, the silence that holds truths we are never meant to understand. A chill swept through him, not from the air, but from inside. It was the feeling again, that subtle tilt, that heavy, shifting warning that had haunted him for years, but this time it wasn't about a bridge or steel or water. It was something else, something broader, something he couldn't interpret, like standing in a forest and knowing you're being watched, but not knowing from where. He opened his eyes. The river looked the same. The city looked the same. But he didn't. Something inside him had changed. A sense, a signal, an invisible tremor that hummed beneath his ribs. He whispered to himself, as he had done in the months after the collapse, "I saw one disaster. I don't want to see another." The wind moved gently through the metal beams overhead, creating a soft, hollow sound, too reminiscent of that dream to ignore. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He simply stood there, letting the night settle around him, feeling the world tilt just slightly, as if warning him that the story wasn't over.